Be back with you again this year. I feel like a stand-up comedian. When he comes out, he says, man, it's good to be back with you. Just flew in from so-and-so. It is. This is my 4th year in a row to do this event. And you know, when you first get into public office and you're going to begin to give a lot of speeches, they give you a secret. They say, Ryan, you don't want the after lunch spot. Okay, why not? Because everyone eats and they go to sleep. Okay, well, sure enough, at this event, I've had the after lunch spot 3 years in a row, and it kind of became my spot. I was really proud of that. Man, the crowd was warm. Last year, the power went out, and everyone just had a great time. I get a call about a month ago. Chad says, hey, Ryan, we're going to move you to the afternoon. What? This is my spot. What are you doing to me, Chad? Who on earth are you bumping me? Who is it that you're bumping me for that gets the lunch spot? The lieutenant governor. That's great, Chad. I'll take the afternoon spot. That's just fine. Thank you. But what's cool about the afternoon spot, what's really cool about the end of the day spot, is I got to take off my tie and jacket and roll my sleeves up. So, you know, I'm comfortable. And I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit of a personal story. And I'm going to tie it back to what's going on the ship channel, what's going on in industry, what's going on in the economics around us. Because it's amazing how we can look at personal anecdotes in our life and translate them into what's happening around us. For those who don't know, Steve is always very generous in my introduction, and it's true. I've been very blessed to be part of a company called Pinnacle. And some of you are familiar with us. We get involved in some things here. My wife and I started that company in 2006 out of our garage. And in fact, I remember when we started Pinnacle, I had worked at a couple of other companies. In fact, don't tell anyone I told you this. That was a joke. 2005, the last job I ever had was for a consulting company called Berwanger that none of you have ever heard of. Small consulting company, about 150, 200 people. Well, in November of 2005, the owner at the time, a guy named Pat, had decided he was going to sell Berwanger to Siemens, the big multinational company. Now, Pat and I got along great. I was kind of Pat's little fair-haired boy. You know, I was all gung-ho, growing a business, a little mechanical integrity vision at Berwanger. But I was a little full of myself, and so I tended to butt heads with some of the other leaders at Berwanger. So when it came time for Pat to sell the company, some of the other leaders convinced Pat that they would be better off if I wasn't there. And they were probably right. And so sure enough, November 5th, 2006, or Black Thursday, I was fired from my last job I ever had. Now, I'll tell you, too, that was a really difficult experience for me. I'd never been fired from a job before. I had spent my whole prior 2 years, 3 years, every waking minute building this division of Berwanger that they never had before, this mechanical integrity thing. My wife, if you ask her today, when Ryan got fired, she would say, that was the closest I've ever seen Ryan to depressed. For the week after that, man, didn't want to get off the couch. I mean, I was down. It's interesting looking back now what a blessing that was, because I got fired there. The next 6 months, did a little bit of independent consulting, and in June of 2006, I decided, you know what, I'm going to open my own shop. I'm going to start a company where we're going to really focus on this thing, this reliability, this integrity program thing. We're going to start this company, and you know what, it's going to be a place people like to work. We're going to do great things. Of course, I have no idea how to run a business. Had to learn a lot about how to make payroll and recruit people, how to make sure you pay your taxes, how to open an office space. I mean, how do you set up an IT system? I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. I had to figure it out. But I did, and we did. In fact, our first accountant, our first controller was my wife. I would work all day during the day, and I would come home and take our kids, Sarah, who was 2, and Luke, who was only a few months old. I would take care of them at like 5 or 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening, grab them so Jennifer could sit down and do invoices, make payroll. The first couple of years, that's how we worked. Worked out very much in our favor. Today, Pinnacle, in fact, right now is about 850 people. Does business all over the world, and it's certainly I have been more blessed than I can really relay to you. We have a phenomenal team of people who have come on since then. Some have been there almost since the day we started and built such an amazing company. Through all of that, you learn how fortunate you are and how blessed you are. And both my parents were teachers, so we didn't have a lot of extra money growing up. And today, my wife and my kids and I, we have a little bit more money. And I had a conversation with my father just 2 weeks ago. I'm on the phone with Dad, and I say, Dad, I got to tell you something. I think that I'm not as good a father in one area as you were. And he says, oh, okay, son, tell me about that. I said, Dad, you taught us the value of $1 really well. Growing up, I knew what it took to go out and earn $1, and I knew what it felt like to waste $1. I'm afraid I have not taught my kids that lesson. Not near as well as you did, Dad. My brother and sister and I, we all know how to, take care of ourselves well enough by the grace of God. And you seem to teach us a really good lesson. And he kind of laughs on the phone and says, son, I've worried about that for you. Because I'll tell you, son, it really wasn't any genius of ours. The fact is, we just didn't have any money. So it was necessity. If you wanted to buy something, you were going to have to go out and earn it. But you have a problem teaching your kids that. So over the last 6 months, as a matter of fact, I've been working on how to change the way we're raising our kids. I got Sarah, who's 14, Luke, who's 12, Lance, who's 9. I'm like, man, I want to teach them the same lessons my parents taught me. And so we're going pretty hardcore. Now, I live in Friendswood, and like a lot of nice suburbs around here, you know what happens when kids turn 16. Their parents buy them all brand new cars, right? And our daughter, our kids, we've raised them to be ready to take all these resources and the opportunities that God has given us and to do special things with them, so they know that we've been very blessed. And my daughter in the last few months has been talking about, Dad, I'm going to turn 15 in January. Now I'm going to turn 16 a year after that. Dad, what kind of car am I going to get? I said, well, Sarah, I'm glad you asked that. You're going to get whatever car you can afford. Dad, you're not going to pay for my car? Well, no, Sarah, you're going to have to earn some money, pay for your own car. But Dad, we've got plenty of money. Sarah, no, we don't have plenty of money. I have plenty of money. You're broke. Now, this is a rude awakening for a 14-year-old who's a freshman at school now, that all of a sudden things are getting changed. I will tell you, because she is so much more mature and so much wiser at the age of 14 than I was, today. And she's taking it in stride. The lesson I'm reminded of, the reason I tell this story and talking about lessons we learn, is that often in life, we don't have the good fortune of being able to learn lessons when it's not painful. I can't tell you how many really great young people I've hired in my career to come work at Pinnacle and other companies. They were ambitious, they were smart, did really well in school, but hadn't learned some of the basic life lessons about serving a customer, about being responsible. I remember one time we interviewed somebody. This is a true story. We interviewed somebody for a job at Pinnacle probably 5-6 years ago. They showed up late for the interview. And I'd heard this kind of story before. I really didn't believe when this person said this that they were serious. I thought they were joking. I'm sorry I'm late. 15 minutes late. I'm sorry I'm late. My mom didn't call me to wake me up like she promised she would. Wow. So where does this strike us when we look at industry today? What didn't make the discussion that was up here today, but you look around what's happening, not just in Pasadena, not just on the Ship Channel area, not just Houston, not even just Texas. The growth in industry, all industries, certainly oil, gas, petrochemicals, power generation, those are leading the charge. We are doing more things in those areas than in many other areas in the country today, certainly in Texas. But because of this access to affordable, reliable energy and access to commodities at a price point that beats the rest of the world. We are seeing a resurgence that we have not seen literally in a generation. Some of the economics around oil and gas are better today than they've been in my entire life of 43 years. Now the question for us is, what do we do with the landscape that's around us today? You know, it's easy to get focused on, man, we're employing a lot of people, we're creating a lot of jobs, we're doing a lot of big things. Man, look at all of the growth around us, all the construction. That's exciting and it's fantastic. But the world is changing at a faster rate today than it ever has. Technology is changing the way we do things at a faster rate than it ever has. Today, more of us look up information on our phones than we do any other venue. Does anyone remember looking up something in a thing called an encyclopedia? Yeah, that was not that long ago. Right? I remember it was not that long ago. I was like, Wikipedia, what the hell is that? Now it's the way you look stuff up. There's descriptions in my children's education system for how to use Wikipedia. You ask them about this thing called Britannica, they think that you're talking about the 1800s. The world is changing so quickly. And if we are on our A game, if we're playing our cards right, we'll be looking forward and saying, okay, how do we leverage the opportunities around us to not just make hay while the sun shines, but make hay for an entire generation? The last 2 years when I've come up and talked to you, I've made some predictions. In fact, I've said a lot of the same things. The growth in our industry, in heavy industry, oil and gas, chemical processing, the growth in these areas has been pretty consistent even through the downturn. The 2015, 2016 downturn, we could look on the horizon and we could see that things were going to be positive. It was difficult today, but we could see that things were going to be positive. Even just in the last year, since I was in front of you, September of 2017, some major things have happened. Go back to November of 1970. November of 1970 was when the United States was producing 10.044 million barrels of crude oil per day. That record stood until November of last year. Since I spoke to you last time, the United States, for the first time, eclipsed its record, 10.48 million barrels a day in November. And today, the United States is almost at 11 million barrels per day. The state of Texas, when I spoke to you last time, was at about 3.4 million barrels per day of production. And that month, September of last year, was the month in which Texas beat its own record from September of 1972, when it had produced 3.4 million barrels a day. Also, in the last couple of months, something notable happened. For the first time in 30 years, the United States became the largest crude oil producer on the planet. First time in 30 years. We passed Russia in the past couple of months. The landscape around us, we continue to grow, we continue to thrive, we continue to expand. Let's talk about natural gas for a second. In the last year, since I spoke to you last time, the United States has added 10 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas production. 10 billion, from about 74 to 84 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas. Texas, on its own, has added about 3 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas production. When you hear guys up here talking about expanding chemical plants, petrochemical facilities, arguably the biggest single driver of that is $2.90 a BTU natural gas that is so affordable because there's so much of it being produced. We look on the horizon now, we can say, wow, where do we go from here? Every single month for the last 6 months, Texas has set a new production record for crude oil. Right now we're at about 4.4 million barrels of crude oil per day. Growing to levels that if you'd have asked 10 years ago, no one thought possible. And today, people say we're just getting started. We've got more to go. Now we're going to hit some headwinds. There's no question. We live in a world in which every other country owns the minerals. Let me say that again. Did you know that in the United States, this is the only country in which a private individual, a private company can own minerals? The minerals that are underneath us right now are probably owned by some individual, some company. In every other nation, it's owned by the government. What that means is the governments are very heavily incentivized to be competitive. When you hear an oil producer talking about going out and drilling a $15 million well, or building a $100 million platform, or expanding a $1 billion facility, those are big, big dollars for a company. Those are rounding errors for governments. China today is investing more money in refining than any other nation, including the United States. The United States is the #1 refiner in the world, refining about 18.5 million barrels per day of crude oil. China is doing everything it can to get there, recognizing the new normal, the new name of the game is going to be refining again. Like it was in the late 70s, early 80s, refining might be the name of the game, processing. The ability to take all of this stuff and make it into useful products is where everyone's looking. We're going to have some headwinds. Now, the advantages of the United States are, I won't say they're immeasurable, but they're very tough to quantify. The fact that we've got so much existing integrated infrastructure. What I mean by that is when you say, well, I've got, over 3 million barrels a day of crude oil coming just out of the Permian Basin. I got 450,000 miles of pipeline in this state. I've got 6 million barrels a day of refining capacity just on the Texas Gulf Coast, and I got 18.5 million barrels in the country. Import and export facilities that can move everything from petrochemical products to natural gas, import heavy sour crude, export light sweet crude. Our combined infrastructure is second to none. That's the advantage we have. And when you couple that with the fact that we've got a lot of people here that know how to do this stuff, we've got universities and junior colleges that are set up to educate people, everything from process system controls to architectural design to civil and structural engineering. We're set up to do this stuff. But the challenges for us will not simply be to do it faster than everybody else. It will be, how do we advance from here? Historically, the United States continues to be one of the best in the world at doing it. Our private business, our entrepreneurs, our innovative leaders in private business continue to drive the market, continue to drive innovation in ways that other countries dream of. But know that when everybody out there looks and says, oh my gosh, we want to be a player in this space, we want to be able to compete in things like transportation, technology development, we want to compete in things like medicine, food, we're going to have to compete when it comes to energy and basic products. You will hear, if you read international publications, read Bloomberg or Forbes, international reporting, you'll hear countries talking about, they even talk about independence. They talk about independence off of U.S. leadership or U.S. dominance. What do they do to get off of U.S. petrochemicals, for example, or to not be dependent on it? We're going to have some headwinds. Let's use one specific example that you wouldn't think would be something we're talking about here, but it is the type of thing we have to be leaders in outside of our companies, outside of our businesses. Both of my parents were teachers, as I said. My dad taught physics for 44 years, Texas public school system. My mom taught chemistry for 38 years, combination of public and private school. And I think I joked one year before that, that you have two parents who have a combined 82 years of science education. You have no choice. You are going to be a dork. The thing is, when my mom and dad started teaching before I was born, they taught the exact same way we teach today. And they were doing it just like the teachers who were a generation and a generation older than them. Our kids are showing up in classroom. My kids go to Friendswood schools right now, public schools in Friendswood. They are showing up and a teacher will lecture them virtually the same way it was done 100 years ago. Now, we are blessed that we have when you look around our state, we have a fantastic crop of educators in this state. And I will tell you that teaching is one of the noblest professions because they do not make very much money. And for those of us who have kids, dealing with a group of 22-year-old kids, that's like hell. There is not enough money you could pay me to do that job. So blessed are we that some people choose to do it, choose to educate the next generation. The thing that we have to do is empower them with the same type of innovation that we see in the industries that we talk about today. How will that teacher of the next generation, the kid who's growing up in class today that says, I want to be a teacher like my daughter does, how will she stand in front of a classroom if my daughter chooses to teach and educate those kids? What technology will they use? When there's a kid in her classroom, for example, So let's say she teaches right here in Houston area, who says, I just don't know if I'm cut out for college. I like working with my hands. I like working out in the environment. I like working out in the world around me. I like feeling the sun on me. I just don't know if I can spend 4 more years in a classroom. How will she educate that kid? How will that kid learn? Actually, if you go take the process technology course at San Jacinto College and you graduate with that 2-year certification, did you know you can go work at one of these plants and make 40% more than the average 4-year graduate from a university in Texas? That, by the way, is true. Where's my San Jack people? Yeah, that's true, right? There we go. The way we open up opportunities to the next generation, the way we open up things that if we are sitting there telling every kid, everybody goes to college. You really need to go to college, because if you don't go to college, you're a loser. Which I'm afraid is the message that we're sending today. We're going to defeat some children, some kids, some future leaders who were not designed to spend 40 hours a week sitting in a classroom. How do we educate them? How do we show them new opportunities that today we are not in the classroom? Now, some schools are doing that. Places like San Jacinto, even here in Pasadena, they opened up their technology campus, which is right on the corner of the Beltway and Genoa Red Bluff, I think. And we're moving that way, but we're not going fast enough. One thing I'm blessed about being in public office, I'm a railroad commissioner, right? If you want to drill an oil well, you want to drill a gas well, put in a disposal well, build a pipeline, I regulate that stuff. You got to follow my rules. Not overly exciting, unless you're a big dork like me. However, I also get to interact with people across industry all day long, and we hear the same thing over and over. People, 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 people. We need more people. We need the future people. We need people of all working environments. Heck, we're willing, I think the average salary in the petrochemical industry on the ship channel is like $111,000 a year, average pay. I mean, it's staggering. And they're saying, I need people. I'm going, how can you not get people? Where are they? Something is amiss in how we're opening up those opportunities for kids, not just in high school, but even in junior high. Just like when I started and I said, I realized, oh my gosh, I haven't taught my kids how to make a buck. There's going to be a whole group of kids that we have to do the same thing with. How are we opening up opportunities for them? And that will be a challenge that faces all of us. I'll tell you why. Friendswood, Texas. People in Friendswood are very proud of our schools. My wife volunteers up there, as do a lot of mothers, a lot of parents get involved. The whole hover parent, y'all heard that term? I think that was invented in Friendswood. The challenge for us is we love our schools. Anybody I know from Deer Park loves Deer Park schools. Anyone grew up in Pasadena? We love Pasadena schools. You grew up in LaPorte, man, we love LaPorte schools. Very proud of our schools. We are personally connected to our teachers. So when I go to somebody in Friendswood and I say, listen, and I talk about the advancement in education, the use of technology, changing to a system where you watch a lecture online because somebody is the best physics lecturer in the world, my father. And then you go into the classroom. And in the classroom, you work problems with other students. You don't get to lecture there. There are ways that we can I don't know what the perfect ones are. I'm not an expert. They're sitting at that table. But there are ways for us to do that, and we have to begin to test those things. We have to challenge the status quo in those things. If you go to Friendswood people and you say, listen, here's what I think we ought to do. We ought to use more technology. We ought to look at how do we streamline and be more efficient by using technology, different education systems. Everyone in Friendswood says, absolutely, that's a great idea. Fantastic, I'd like to start in Friendswood. You just mind your own business. Not in our schools. We got a very personal connection to our schools. I've got it too. My wife's got it too. So that's why it's challenging for us. It's not that we don't see the opportunity. It's not that we don't recognize it needs to be done. It's being willing. It's being willing to talk about a change and recognize there's ways to get better that are not about laying people off. They're not about doing away with jobs. They're simply changing the dynamic. These are the types of things that we need to be working on. I'll go back to petrochemicals and talk some oil and gas, some market stuff, and I'll give you my predictions for this next year. And as I close here, this year, because they had me do the closing talk here, I'm going to have time to take some questions. And I always like to do it this way. I challenge you to ask me difficult questions. You can ask me slow pitch questions if you want to, but ask me anything. Private business, political involvement, spiritual life, what I ate for breakfast, I don't care. But ask me some real questions, because I want to know what y'all want to talk about. But let me tell you where the market is going. For the next, I'm going to say foreseeable future, the next 2 to 3 years, the market's going to be very good for us. I'm going to put one gigantic asterisk on this, barring a global recession. The only thing really that could take down commodity prices could be a global recession. And there are some economists that are forecasting that. They're forecasting a 2020-2021 global recession driven primarily by global institutional/government debt. They're saying that governments and institutions that are raising lots of money, I mean everything from school districts that have bonds to gigantic public schools that are doing fundraising campaigns to the federal government is borrowing money at an insane pace. They're saying that's unsustainable, and eventually when interest rates get too high, inflation rates get too high, that we're going to see a global recession. Parking that over here, barring that, the market's going to be very, very good. The world today uses about 100 million barrels of crude oil per day, and the world uses about 300 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. I'm going to forget the numbers in terms of hundreds of millions of tons of petrochemicals it uses today, but they're all growing at 2, 3, 4% per year, predominantly in growing areas of the world. Places like India, South America, the Middle East even, places in Africa. The growing economies, those that are going from being a third world country to a second world country, from being an undeveloped nation to developed nation, that's where all this growth is coming from, or a large part of it. And they are looking to the United States to provide that. Let's use just the metrics on oil for a second. I say the world's using about 100 million barrels of crude oil per day. We're adding between 1 million and 1.5 million barrels of crude oil per day to that. In fact, this year, the first forecast we heard from the IEA, International Energy Agency, was to grow by 1.8 million barrels of crude oil per day. They've ratcheted that back down, but right now they're still sitting at 1.5 million barrels of crude oil per day growth. So next year at this time, I'll be saying the world's using 101.5 million barrels per day. And they're forecasting that for the next few years. So you consider and say, wow, in 3-4 years, we'll be sitting at 105 million barrels of crude oil per day. Well, here's my first prediction. We can't grow our oil production globally at $60 a barrel. We can barely do it at $65 a barrel. It's going to take 70. If you asked me at the end of last year when I got up before you next year, I wasn't ready to give this prediction, but by January of this year, in my market analysis, I said, I think WTI prices will hover between $58 and $66 a barrel for most of the year. That was my prediction at the beginning of this year. However, I had one big asterisk on that. It was barring some sort of big international deal like additional Iran sanctions, which is why oil prices have climbed up into the low 70s and have hung out there for a lot of the year. Looking at next year, I think oil prices will go into the 70s, which they are right now, like 71, 72 today. I would expect them to be in the mid 70s, even into the low 80s for part of next year. So we'll give our official prediction December or January, but expect that we're going to be in the high 70s, even low 80s for most of next year. I think that the state of Texas will go from producing 4.5 million barrels a day to about 5.5 million barrels a day of crude oil production, but it will be painful. The reason I say that is most of that increase in production is going to come out of the Permian Basin, Midland, Texas, and people in Midland, Texas are waiting for 45 minutes at signal lights because there are trucks lined up for miles and miles trying to move product in and out of Midland, Texas. One of the issues that's going to come up in the upcoming legislative session is how to fund construction of county roads, county infrastructure, in particular in places that are developing all of that new oil and gas. The state of Texas will also put an additional probably 2 to 3 billion cubic feet of natural gas in the market per day. And because in Midland, in all of that Permian Basin area, they really care about the oil, they'll be willing to give that natural gas away. I would say natural gas prices right now is about $2.90-ish a BTU. Will not go up from that anytime next year. In fact, I think if anything, they will go down. Wouldn't surprise me if we spend a lot of next year in the $2.80 to $2.70, even lower range for natural gas. So for our folks who are in the natural gas business, that's tight, that's difficult. But if you're in the power generation business or you're in the petrochemical business, you love that. because now your feedstock product, the number one thing you're spending money on, is cheaper. So you'll see additional petrochemical investments. You'll see great margins. You'll see great jobs and great investments all along the ship channel. I have one other prediction. Talk about oil, talk about natural gas prices, and we talked about Texas crude oil production. Those are the things I think are going to happen in the market next year. When you poise for 3 years out, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a vague prediction. Oil prices will consistently go up. Once again, barring a global recession, oil prices will continue to go up. Natural gas prices will not for the next 2 to 3 years. Natural gas prices are going to stay about where they are. Oil will climb. Oil will climb because in order to produce 102, 104, 106 million barrels a day, we need that price. When you get past 3, 4 years, when you start looking even further out than that, you're going to see oil prices go even higher. Now I'm going to close by knocking another prediction that you heard out there. Anybody heard of the peak demand theory? Some people say, well, we used to talk about peak oil. In 1970, Middle East oil embargo. In fact, we had 2 of them. One in 1974, one in 1978. I think I'm getting my dates right. After the second one, President Carter at the time came out and told all Americans, we have to get off of oil. Oil production in the United States was actually on a slight decline, was fairly level at the time, but our reserves were going down. The amount of oil that we had at one point in the United States, we forecasted we only had 6 years of oil. It wasn't right then, but it was around that time. Carter said to the American people, we got to get off oil. We're running out. We're going to be doomed. We're dependent on the Middle East. We have to get energy independent. That's where that phrase got coined. So we got to get off of oil, and if we do it, man, it'll benefit everybody. And that started a national objective to get off of hydrocarbons. Well, of course, we look around the United States today and say, golly, we've got 35, 40 years of oil, and that's just proven reserves. We got like 100 years of natural gas. The landscape there has obviously changed. But at the time, we thought we were running out of oil, so there was peak oil. There wouldn't be enough to fill the market. Now, people talk about peak demand. You know what? Eventually, people are going to stop wanting all this oil. You'll hear some dates as soon as 2025. Some people say in 7 years that the world's use of oil will peak and it will start to drop down. I don't believe that that's true. I spent a lot of time studying this. Once again, I know not everybody likes all these numbers, but, lucky for you, I'm a big dork, and this is what I do. I don't think it's going to be that soon because, as I said earlier, most of the world's growth in energy, in the use of chemicals, in the use of raw product is coming from developing nations. They do not have the sophisticated infrastructure we do. They don't have smart grids. They don't have hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline. But it takes very little sophistication to carry a can full of gas. That's what people are. That's why the percentage of the world's energy that comes from oil is not shrinking, it's growing. I'll say that again. A lot of people think, well, wait a minute. We got solar, we got wind, we got more hydroelectric. Surely oil is dropping. No. The percentage that is oil is growing. Not as fast as natural gas. That's the biggest growing percentage is natural gas, even on a percentage basis. Yes, we are seeing growth in renewables, and those will become a bigger and bigger piece of our country's energy economy. No question. It's going to happen. Regardless of what you believe in things like global warming, the fact is the public demand in certain parts of the country for renewable energy sources is there. It's going to happen. It's going to become a part of our energy portfolio. I'm glad they're doing it in other states because it's extremely expensive. I don't like my electricity bills the way they are right now in the summertime. I certainly don't want to pay 3 times as much. So California, have fun with that. But that said, they will become a bigger part of our electricity system. But I believe that we will not see peak demand by 2025. I think it would be closer to 2030, even 2035. Now, during that time, though, the price of oil is going to get expensive. To produce enough to supply the world, it will be expensive. And one of the things that we have to be talking about, just like we're talking about how to educate our kids more efficiently, just like we're talking about how to make innovative advancements in other areas, one way is how to leverage our dollars in energy as effectively as possible. And I know we're already working on that, but that will be the big thing that industries and companies are challenged with going into the future. I'm going to close with one last story. My daughter calls me the other day, and she says, Dad, she's 9th grader. Dad, I was in class today, and the teacher tells us that fossil fuels are bad. Okay. What did you say? She said, well, I told the teacher my dad was the railroad commissioner. I said, what did she say? She goes, what's a railroad commissioner? I'm kidding about that last part. I said, what did you say? And she says, well, Dad, I didn't know what to say. She said, fossil fuels are bad. And she said, now, Dad, fossil fuels is like oil and natural gas, right? I said, yes, ma'am, it is. She said, Dad, I don't understand why she said that. I said, well, did she explain why they are bad? Well, no, I can't remember. Did she say something about global warming? Yes, she said that. Yeah, global warming, that's why they're bad. I said, did she explain why she believes that global warming makes fossil fuels bad? No, I think she just said fossil fuels cause global warming. I said, okay. Sarah, let me explain to you, there are two schools of thought on this, I told her. So one school of thought is that the world is heating at a faster rate than normal because as we burn a molecule of methane, which is carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms, we burn that by combining it with oxygen. And I'm forcing her to do the chemical formula, which she just hated. I said, you get CO2 and water. And that CO2 is going up in the atmosphere, and what happens is you get a thicker layer or more CO2 molecules, and energy can't get off the planet as fast. It hits a CO2 molecule instead of going out to infinite space, and it stops there and heats up the atmosphere. That's what global warming is. And I said, some people believe that mankind's production of CO2 is causing all the global warming. So other people believe that the earth naturally warms and cools, and that CO2 levels naturally fluctuate, and that we may be having some impact, but it's negligible compared to what is naturally happening. In fact, I'll tell you, Sarah, that the planet has been warmer than it is today. I didn't tell her my opinion. I said, those are the two schools of thought. And I said, I did say this, I said, it's probably somewhere in the middle. She said, Dad, if that's true, I mean, in other words, if there are two schools of thought, shouldn't they have to tell us both sides in school? Exactly. And I did too. I was on the phone. I was like, God, you're so smart. The reason I end with that story is it's unfortunate that in the world we live in today, the environment, energy, we don't talk about them as if they are the future infrastructure that will support our way of life. We talk about them as if they're political footballs. They're punted back and forth. People on the blue side believe this, people on the red side believe this. Liberals believe this, conservative believe this. We're at our best, those of us who are in the energy industry, who are in the petrochemical industry, who deal with hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, we're at our best when we listen and we articulate the two different opinions. When we're patient. You know, people believe they have this kind of stigma about the oil business. Oh, it's just a bunch of cowboys out there in West Texas drilling holes. They don't care what they do. I'm telling you, as a guy who regulates this space, 99.9% of the people I deal with are good, conscious business leaders who constantly do things to give back to their community, to take care of their employees, to serve in their church, at their kids' Boy Scout troop. These are the people leading these companies. Now, there are bad actors, just like there are anywhere. And one of my primary jobs as a railroad commissioner is to find those people and take them out. If you're going to do bad business, you're not going to do it in our state. But for the other 999 out of 1,000 to celebrate their contribution to our society and to our state. We're at our best when we represent those leaders, when we are not just somebody who works for Exxon or Shell or Total, not somebody who works for the port, not just somebody who sells valves or supplies staff to those companies, not just somebody who goes in and does an inspection. We're an advocate for this industry that doesn't just make oil, doesn't just produce natural gas, but provides the energy that we use to do almost every single thing we do every day. And we are getting better at it all the time, and we are proud of what we do. With patience and with conviction. Be willing to listen, be willing to dialogue, and be willing to engage people, especially those who have a difference of opinion. Politics today, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of room for that, do we? Man, you can get on Facebook. Okay, one last story. I'm running for office, and I advocate that we're doing great things in this nation, certainly when it comes to energy and petrochemicals. And I'm posting this stuff on Facebook. And I made the mistake in my political Facebook page of reading the responses. You must know where this is going. Have y'all read these responses? What strikes me about Facebook is that people comment like they think it's anonymous. I read down this one where I post this really great thing about growth and energy or something. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. Now I go down about 4 bars, and there's a line where a woman says, "You are awful, period. If I see you, I will run you down in my bleeping car, period." I click on her Facebook page. There's a picture with her and her kids. I'm like, you know this is not anonymous, right? Now you wonder, if we were having this conversation live, if she was sitting in the audience today, would she do that? No. We've lost the ability to have this kind of good exchange, a positive exchange about where we're going. Sure, we can have difference of opinion. That kind of exchange, though, is what leads to the big advancements that we need in the world so badly. That's why conferences like this are so important. When we get together and we talk about things like this, that we can go out and go, man, I was at a good conference today. And then there was this kind of weird guy who got really fired up, but everyone else was really calm and cool. But when we are at our best, when we're talking openly with people, when we're sharing our stories, when we are proud of the industry in which we serve and the impact it has on the world around us, man, that creates room for that dialogue. Last year when I was here, I ended by saying, this is about legacy. If we do this right, this economy grows. You think about the numbers of jobs that are created, the amount of technology that can be built, the impact on our communities all across this region and across the entire state will be affected by our ability to do this well. It'll be during our time when our leadership will lay the groundwork that will pay dividends for a generation. But today, the things we do this year, especially in this November election cycle, don't let the politics get in the way of the discourse. Don't let opinion, don't let defensiveness get in the way of our ability to listen. If we do that well, we will represent this industry in a way we could all be very proud of. Thank you very much for letting me visit with you today. It's a pleasure to serve you as your railroad commissioner. Now it's 4 o'clock. Can I take a couple of questions? Can I? Or I could get ousted? No, we can take a couple of questions. All right. Give me some good ones. I don't get to do this normally because I'm at the lunchtime slot. I can't see. Yes, sir. Is that Jim Dannenbaum? Hey, Jim, how are you? Do I hear your question right? What is the state doing to try to push FERC to give us the approvals for new pipelines and for new export-import facilities? Yes, sir. Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Well, I appreciate that because you've given me a little room to brag. At the end of the day, we don't have any authority over FERC. I can scream and holler all day long. At the end of the day, all I've got is a slightly louder megaphone than the average citizen. What we can do, though, is to continually explain the economics. In fact, about a year and a half ago, it became apparent that the port of Corpus Christi was not only ripe for an investment, it also represented some profoundly positive economics in return on that investment. The port of Corpus Christi is the #1 crude export port in the country. You from Corpus? It is the #1 crude export. See, ever hear for like Beaumont and Houston? They're like, oh, Corpus. It is. It's the #1 crude export port. By the way, that benefits all of us because the more that we have a fungible market in the crude market, I can export light sweet crude and import heavy sour crude into our refining infrastructure, the better. So when we think about the entire state infrastructure, Corpus Christi, and my one fan, is a key part of our overall economy. What we did is, in fact, about 2 years ago, I got very vocal. In fact, I brought in, it was Scott Pruitt, at the time the administrator for the EPA. He and I met and together advocated. He went back and talked to the president about, hey, did you know that if the job had already been approved, project had been approved in Congress, but the Army Corps of Engineers wouldn't approve the funding. He went back, talked to my senators, talked to once again the EPA Administrator Pruitt. They went back, pushed for that project, and that project is now slowly being funded. Nothing happens fast in Washington, but it's happening now. And they're going to dredge that out, deepen that port, and enable super tankers to come in to haul out more, not just crude oil, but also petrochemical products and natural gas. But it's a long answer to your question. What we can do is advocate. And I'll tell you, especially when you have bipartisan advocacy, when Republicans and Democrats are both saying, hey, this is how, if you will give us the funding, this is how it's going to pay dividends, not just for Texas, but for the entire country, because we can move these products out that are coming in from Oklahoma, Nebraska, New Mexico. And so we got that done by just advocating and being very, very focused on it. That's all we really can do today, but it works, and that's what we're doing. Do we have another one? Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Commissioner. Michelle Hunley with Stratus Public Relations. And every legislative session, there's a bill to change the Texas Railroad Commission name. What's the holdup? What's the problem?
Very good question. If you would have asked me, say 10 years ago, Ryan, do you think we should change the name of the Texas Railroad Commission? I would have said no. You know, because everyone in the oil business knows who the Texas Railroad Commission is, and you know, we got a proud history. You read the book, The Prize, Daniel Yergin's book about the history of the oil business, actually talks about the Railroad Commission in the book. Some of the first standardized regulation of production attributed to the Railroad Commission. If you ask me today, I would say a resounding, oh yes, we need to change the name. Because what I didn't understand 10 years ago, even 5, 6 years ago, was that the Railroad Commission is not there for the industry. Sure, we benefit the industry, because when your average citizen has confidence that an industry is adequately regulated, that an industry is operating safely, we get a social license to operate. I actually heard that for the first time when I was an employee of Marathon. And my supervisor, the plant manager, said, we need the neighbors here to know we operate safely. We want them to have confidence in our regulators. I just didn't appreciate that until I was one. And people don't know what the Railroad Commission does, and that's a miss. So what happens is this. There is still some people, traditionalists, if you have people been around the legislature for 20 years that have this same historical, traditional pride that I did, and they should. Texas is a proud place, and we do well with our traditions. And if I were to poll today, there are people in here who don't think we should change it. And by the way, that's fantastic. I applaud the fact that we've got that pride in our state, but I will tell you that the way we do business today, I need people to know what we do. So I advocate for it, and eventually, I'm confident it will change. When there's enough kind of the old guard that's out, and the new guard says, yes, we need our public to know that the Texas Railroad Commission is actually our energy regulators. And if they were called the Texas Energy Commission or something like that, people would know where to go. They would know who to question. They would know why it's good that dork engineer talks about all this stuff. So I appreciate you asking that. And I think it will not be this session, but I'm hopeful that if I were to say run for re-election again, which would be in 2020, if I were to serve another term, that'd be 8 years total. I hope that I will not finish my time as a railroad commissioner. I hope I finish it as an energy commissioner. All right, one more, and then they're going to give me the hook. Yes, sir.
Commissioner, I'm Glenn Royal, chair of the Alliance here. With Texas and the United States leading now as an energy exporter, why is there a persistent delta between Brent and WTI?
Man, great question. The short version is this. It's about the cost to move that product. In other words, if I'm producing, and by the way, did you know that if you're a Midland oil producer right now, you just drilled a well and you got fresh oil in the market, you don't have a contract already in place to move that product, you're probably getting $55 a barrel for it. And Brent right now is what, 78, I think? Almost 80. So you're like, man, why? Now, in South Texas, in the Eagle Ford, they're getting closer to $72, $73 a barrel. Their prices are based on Louisiana Light Sweet. All it has to do with is the cost to get that barrel out of Midland. Y'all can see the map I'm working on here. Get that barrel out of Midland, move it via pipeline to, say, Cushing, Oklahoma, move it via another pipeline all the way down to, say, Houston or Corpus Christi. Or if you're lucky, move it directly via pipeline, get it on a barge and ship it somewhere. If the cost of that is, say, $4 or $5 a barrel and everything else is equal, we're going to get $4 or $5 a barrel less. Add into that right now we do have an insufficient amount of export fluidity. In other words, we've got more light sweet crude, more WTI in the state than we can get out. So that further drives the price separation apart. Now, what has happened in the past, you'll see times when WTI is at the premium. Back not that long ago when we were importing light sweet crude, WTI actually was at a premium over Brent because the world was awash in that region of light sweet crude. So they will fluctuate a little bit. But for the last, 8 years, Brent has been at a premium because of the cost to transport that product out. I will tell you that if one of the reasons why you hear a lot of conversation about pipelines, which is really the biggest challenge we're facing today, and there are several big crude pipelines being built to not just take the current crude that's being produced, but the additional crude capacity. When we can get that crude cheaply and affordably from the Permian Basin down to, say, Corpus Christi or down to Houston on a barge and shipped out, you'll see that differential start to shrink where it's at most the cost of that individual transport. And that'll be coming. And I think most will tell you that's around $4 a barrel, so that everything else being equal, 4 would be the number if it was just about transportation. But I'll tell you this, another thing that's going to drive that margin out will be just changes to refineries. Your companies like Marathon and Valero, others talking about adding more topping units to process more light sweet crude, blend more light sweet with heavy sour. That will also drive that margin out because there'll be more demand here to compete for the end product gasoline. Our guys will be competing for that end product, and eventually the margin will shrink to nothing. Okay, can I take one more or do I got to get off? All right, one more if you have one. Done such an excellent job, Ryan. We're going to kick you off the stage. All right, one last time. Thank you very much for your time today. I'll hang around and answer some questions afterwards. You'll have a great rest of your day.
Great job, buddy.